Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar hosted by Ciphr, HR and Payroll Solutions for Charities. It's great to have you with us today. I'm Catherine, I'm our Head of Content, and with me are Jackie and James from our sales team. They're both experts at helping charities and non-profits find the right HR and payroll software for their needs. Thank you, Jackie and James, for joining us. How are you today?
I'm very well. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining it. Very much looking forward to the next 45 minutes, and hopefully we can share some tips to help you on your HR journeys.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. It's great to be here, and welcome everyone. I look forward to talking through some of the slides a bit later on.
Let's take a quick look at our agenda for today. We're going to tell you a little bit about Ciphr. We'll talk about the HR challenges facing charities. Talk a little bit about how to understand what you might need from new HR software, and how to demonstrate return on investment and identify the areas where that can really make a difference. Jackie and James are also here to answer your questions, so send them in using the chat and we'll get to those later on. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Jackie to tell you a little bit more about who we are and what we do.
Great, thanks, Catherine. So Ciphr, so anyone who's not come across Ciphr, we've been around for almost 40 years. We've always been based in Marlow. We've most recently, in the last literally 4 weeks, moved over to Reading. But for 40 years, we've been providing specialist HR payroll solutions, and now our solutions support our customers, including onboarding, training and development, rewards and benefits, to cover that complete employee life cycle. We've most recently there, you'll see on the slide, we've bought a company called Marshalls, so our customers can now benefit from not only a broad range of e-learning content, but we can also create bespoke e-learning, and our solution can link into our customers' own third-party platforms via API connectivity, and we work with some great specialist partners, including time and attendance. So that's Ciphr. Next slide, please, Catherine. So what we want to look at, we'll start off by looking at some of the challenges, first of all, in charities. So although charities do have the same aims and objectives, just like any public or private sector business, it's really important for charities that they align these objectives and processes and practice the same way, and if not more, to make the most of your budget. So although charities do depend on volunteers and donations, there is also elements that require you to manage the life cycle of your employees. And that can be right from the recruitment journey through to onboarding, training and developing your staff. Time efficiency and compliance is an absolute must for all charities, and how to prioritise where to get the best return from any investment that you may consider making. Thank you, Catherine. So we wanted to start off first of all and just ask you what your challenges are, that are kind of top of your list, what you'll consider when looking for a new HR system. So we've just put out a few suggestions. So we'll just kind of pause for a few seconds while you give us a bit of feedback about what your challenges are in your charity. So I'll give you a few minutes there just to answer the poll.
Jackie, which are the ones that you see often when you're talking to prospects or customers in the not-for-profit sector?
So often we see the duplication of data. So time for charities, and we'll get into this a little bit later, time is a challenge. HR teams generally tend to be smaller in charities. So we've got one there on duplication of data. Data security and compliance applies and is critical, regardless what kind of sector you are in. So the two in the centre of the screen tend to jump out at us time and time again.
Yeah, and I think that's they're supported by the data that we're seeing here. So nearly half of everyone on the call today said that integrating that central HR with other systems is a major concern, followed by the duplication of data, and those things are so closely linked.
Great, thank you. Okay, so all the answers in there, Catherine? That's great. Okay, so we'll try and break the session down by starting off first of all with some of the challenges. So there's kind of lots of considerations. We're going to focus on 7 here, And we're happy after the session to take any questions or even meet you all on a one-to-one to talk about greater challenges. But first of all, consider what HR looks like at the moment for your charity. Often in charities that James and I work with, it can often be a single person, whereas in a commercial business, it might be a team. And that single person can wear lots and lots of different hats. Bigger charities might have the luxury of HR teams with several members, but one person needs to consider all the roles as well as what kind of system you might need. So you might find yourself with disparate systems as well. So not only do you need to wear lots of different hats, and I'll look at some of those aspects, but you might also be managing disparate systems that don't talk to each other. It may be that you haven't got a system at all. We meet moreover charities that are growing, becoming more successful, that actually everything is on paper records, which again presents a whole load of new challenges. So a heavy workload tends to jump out at us over and over again. When we first meet HR professionals, they're often duplicated work. They've obviously got a workload that is just full on with administration. So it's important that you get the right HR system. Single source of truth is always critical, and there's no reason that selecting the right HR system that you can't get all the information that you need, whether that's whether it's churn, whether it's absent stats, whether it's vacancies available. All of that information should come out of the analytics on a system. So the role of the HR professional in a charity is a range of responsibilities. It can start with recruitment, which can often roll over into onboarding. The HR person can often be responsible for learning and development, performance and appraisals. They in themselves are challenging, trying to organise managers to carry out appraisals, to log the documentation, to do the follow-up processes on the back of development, and schedule the next steps. It can be a real heavy and manual process, and sometimes it's carried out quite infrequently and sometimes not at all. HR can also carry the role of preparing data or duplicating data on other systems. This might include your rewards and benefits platform. It could be a time and attendance platform. And most importantly, it may lie with HR to prep the changes ready for payroll. And with all these different demands on a charity, there is a big risk that the HR person or a small team could suffer burnout. And again, that will present a new range of challenges in terms of the HR person being absent. So getting the right strategic system in place, making the right decisions. Again, data is often difficult to scrape from different systems across a charity, and getting an all-in-one single source of truth will give you all the analytics to make those kind of strategic decisions. So the result could be a missed opportunity to maximise funding. You may not be running as lean as you possibly can. Again, something that a HR system can actually address. Available budget. Budgets are always, virtually without fail, restraints that stop some of our charity clients making the right decisions. So we'll talk about return on investment later on in the session, but it's important to take into account what your budget restraints are, look at your challenges, and make sure that you're getting the best system that's going to give you the right return on investment in the right areas. So next slide, Catherine. So it's important to focus also and not get carried away with yourselves. It's important to focus on what's going to give you the best return, and what's essential and what's a nice to have. It's a large investment. It's not one that you'll repeat very often, so it's important to take into consider all stages. So although your shopping list may be long, it's important to understand what kind of measures, what analytics, what's driving the business, what's taking the most amount of time, what's the most difficult to find out information focused around. And it could be that you can start off with a core HR system, and it might be later on you're looking for a system that you can grow and can evolve. You might look later on to add an effective learning management system. You might look later to add something on time management. So there's lots of kind of avenues, and the options on HR systems can start basic and give the option to grow as things progress. Next slide, Catherine. So lots of not-for-profit organisations, they may not have an HR system, as we've already mentioned, or you might have outgrown your existing system. So you might have some quite labour-intensive processes. It might be a struggle for you to get accurate insights. You might have a lack of people engagement with the system that you've got. It could be that your population don't actually use and engage the system that you currently got. It might be untrustworthy. So the data that you've currently got may not be accurate. It may not always be up to date. And there could be lots of duplication of processes, not just for the HR team, but for managers and employees across your charity. So having to maintain multiple systems that don't talk to each other, that's never ideal for a charity. And volunteer management, excuse me, that needs to be considered as well. The first challenge for the volunteer management is recruiting for the positions. These obviously are not paid employees, so even after you've recruited the right volunteers, it can be a bit of a struggle to identify what volunteer skill sets are, what productivity you may be able to obtain from your new employees or volunteers. And because of the limited amount of time that volunteers will be offering, it can be challenging to get them to carry out the right tasks, match with their skills for the right area for the charity. So all of this information needs to not only be known, but also managed and progressed as that volunteer stays within the charity. Pay and payroll. Although job satisfaction is a major motivation for employees, obviously pay and packages plays a major role in how happy they are with the charity. So where organisations, you might be unable to match salary increases, charity leaders might be considering softer benefits such as working benefits, career development, wellbeing programmes, discounts, day off for birthdays, subsidised gyms, all of those kind of benefits that you need to communicate to employees, you need to manage across your employee base, and also make sure that they've got an easy opt-in or opt-out. Not easy to do if you're managing that kind of data manually. Recruitment, that can be more challenging sometimes for charity than it is in the private sector, because you need to recruit not only employees and volunteers, but also trustees. And filling this position with no financial reward can be even more challenging. So research into the recruitment of trustees conducted shows that while over half of the UK's 200,000 charities are currently recruiting, a majority of them experience challenges with equality and diversity. So your competition is 200,000 charities across the UK. So again, really important to get your recruitment aligned and make it as effective as you can as possible. Learning development, the main reason most people choose to work for charities is that they believe in the cause and the mission. However, a major HR challenge involves maintaining those employees for their well-being, their engagement and their continual satisfaction of remaining with the charity. So due to various cuts, funding, government benefits, charities are experiencing increased demands for services, which will add more pressure to the staff, and sometimes can lead to more sick and again more aspects for you to manage as a HR. So with this in mind, it's important that charities are not overlooking mental health, not only as we've touched on for the HR team, but also for your employees and also for your volunteers. So the right HR system will help you to onboard your new starters. Critical phase for employee productivity and retention. So whilst they're waiting to start, they can update details with an onboarding, they can review company information and policies, And if your system, you want us to integrate with third-party platforms, it'll help you manage the compliance and related tasks, such as digital right to work checks, background checks, DBS. Reports as well, critical reports should be easy to compile, they should be accurate, and the ability to distribute the reports not only to the senior team across the charity, but also to your managers. So you should be able to configure automatic notifications and reminders as well in a good function-rich HR system, such as when holiday allowances are due to run out, when managers need to complete those appraisals with intuitive HR software. Employees don't need to manage manually. They can log in, they complete their appraisal or their feedback about the organisation. It might be that the employees are filling in their own training record as well. So a good HR system will allow you to build processes into the system to be managed by your employee and managers. It'll reduce the amount of data entry, and it will most definitely increase your engagement. And on the compliance, it does play a critical role for all organisations, and a system such as Ciphr will always make sure that you're GDPR compliant with automatic reminders when data needs to be deleted. Next slide, Catherine. So at this point, I'll hand over to James. So he's going to look a little bit more around the right software and particularly on a return on investment.
Thank you, Jackie. Brilliant. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is how do you, with confidence, choose the right HR software. Now, before I jump onto the next slide, I do want to point out that we absolutely recognise that there are lots of scenarios around the procurement of a new HR system, and that your organisation might be in a completely different place to another. So, for example, you could be procuring your very first system, you could be procuring your first, your fifth. There might be a specific driver within your organisation that's pushing you to procure a system. So whilst I'm going to generalise over the next couple of slides, we would absolutely welcome any conversations with anyone that's joined today, anyone that watches this back, just to have some conversations that are specific to you and to talk about your challenges and potentially what to consider when looking to procure a new system. Okay, so next slide, please, Jackie. Catherine, sorry, thank you. Right, so Jackie has talked about some of this already, but I want to sort of circle back to preparation. One of the biggest recommendations that I would give you would be to complete a roadmap of your employee journey. So by looking at every touch point across your employee journey, you'll get a true picture of the challenges that you face as an organisation and therefore what it is that you truly need. So Jackie's talked about some of the functional things to consider, some of the typical requirements that our charity organisations need when we get in front of them around their process to procure. But looking at each one of those touch points will give you exposure to your colleagues, your stakeholders. It will give you exposure to the end user perspective, as well as internal systems, what you're using, what's working, what isn't working, is there the opportunity to replace, amalgamate systems, and doing that at the very early stages will have some additional benefits. So the exercise is a great way to get stakeholders and colleagues brought in. So it's about having conversations around what would it mean for your stakeholders, or what could it mean to procure a new HR solution, and automatically you're going to get their buy-in and their engagement if there's something in it for them, and you can leverage that throughout the whole sort of journey, and we'll talk about the importance of that a little bit later on. Next up, you've got the procurement process itself. So understanding what your procurement process is. So you may not have one, you might have one, you might not know, but at some point, somewhere, someone in your organisation would have been involved with procuring a system. And the best places to start to understand what that looked like is to interact with finance, IT. You might have your own procurement team. You might have legal representatives. There could be colleagues that you could reach out to sort of leverage from their experiences around what that process involved. If you don't have a procurement process, then it's incredibly important to understand who would need to be involved and when. And again, that's really important to get those stakeholders involved and engaged in the project from the early stages, so that when you get to a stage of finding a preferred provider, again, that sort of sign-up process, that due diligence, which we'll talk about in a few moments' time, is much easier to manage. We have lots of scenarios where our organisations, our prospects, our customers don't understand or maybe don't have a procurement process that hasn't been ironed out until the end stages of the procurement process. And if that's the case, that can give significant risks to the project, where you could dedicate months of time, but the project could be derailed at the end because of the lack of understanding around that procurement process. So we find that sometimes the time it takes to actually achieve sign-off is significantly longer than it's taken you to research the market, go through multiple demonstrations and interactions with vendors to get to a point of actually finding a preferred. So it's really important. I can't stress that enough. We're then looking at the budget. So sometimes you might not know or be able to find out what your budget is at the very start of the project. Maybe you've got a system and the budget is measured against that. Maybe it's an exercise where you need to go and understand what systems cost based on the needs that you have, and look at sort of an average amount, create a budget, submit that. But understanding budget at an early stage in the project is also really important. And this tends to be a big hurdle if that's not actioned at the start of the project when we get to that final stage of procurement. There's a big myth around sort of sharing budgets with vendors. And I would absolutely recommend, if you're in a position to understand what that budget is, to do that, because that will enable you to really sort of focus your efforts on providers that are in the right remits in terms of sort of costs of their solutions, so that you don't sort of spend a significant amount of time reviewing solutions to find, you know, the right one for you, to then understand that actually from a commercial perspective it's just not going to work based on the budgets that you're working with. And if you are able to share budgets at the early stages, then vendors can work with you to put something forward that will work in the event that you select them as your preferred supplier. A couple of other things to think about at the start of the project are time constraints. So in terms of time constraints, do you have a burning platform? Do you have a system that's due to switch off in 6 months' time, and therefore you've got to get a replacement embedded, implemented and tested and live before that happens? Do you have any other projects that are due to start? Are there any compelling sort of events happening with the organisation? Are you approaching a busy time within the year that's going to have some issues around capacity? So are there any compelling timescales that you're working towards? And it's important to understand what that looks like at the start of the process, so you can factor that into your plan. And then also, do you have internal resource? So as Jackie sort of mentioned, it's probably the exception where we support organisations that do have, you know, large amounts of resource. Typically, it's sort of small HR teams, if not a single person that wears many hats, as Jackie sort of mentioned. But ultimately, implementing a project, it's not a little bit of work, it is a lot of work. So it's really thinking about, in addition to supporting your sort of day job, do you have capacity to spend 1-2 days a week on the project? And if not, do you have a team, members of your team that can support, that you can sort of delegate some of the responsibilities to? Is there a conversation where you could look at dialing in resource internally from across the business, or could you actually look at factoring in your budget for external resource? So that's something really to think about, and also to question when you're going through the process with vendors around what does the implementation process involve, and what's your level of expected sort of commitment to the project as well. And then the last sort of note there is create a project plan. So this is a really simple thing to do, but by the time you've completed all of those steps, you're going to have a real clear picture around what it is that you need. You've reached out to lots of colleagues and stakeholders, you've got their buy-in and their engagement, you understand exactly what the steps are in your procurement process, who needs to be involved and when. You've got an idea of what budget is, you understand the time constraints that you have into internal resource. So having a project plan just really documents all the steps that you need to follow to get to a point where you're procuring a new solution. And a really great part of that is setting a timescale. So having an idea of actually, you know, in the next 6 months, we have this capacity to look at these presentations within this time frame. By this point, we want to get to a stage where we have a shortlist and so on. So if you have a clear timeline set out within a project plan with steps to action, it just ensures that projects don't slip, you maintain momentum, which is really important. Okay. The next thing we've got is involve stakeholders. So I'm not going to go into too much detail around this, as we've mentioned a few points, but What we tend to find is where we're in front of organisations that don't involve stakeholders, again, when we get to the sort of end preferred stage, that can potentially cause risk to the project where it could be derailed by somebody that's involved that could be a potential blocker. And that might be around things like the understanding of the return of investment. It could be from a commercial perspective and supporting budgets. But if you do involve your stakeholders at the very beginning by completing that roadmap exercise, again, it's about what's in it for them. What are their challenges? What are their touch points across the employee journey? Be that interactions with the end user, be that interactions with your third-party systems or data related to people. By understanding that and looking at the challenges, then you can also, as part of the investment in a solution, look for something that's going to help them and give them a sort of direct return of investment. And then the last point on there is don't go at it alone. So ultimately, if you're sort of wearing many hats, if you're managing people, data and processes, you don't have a large team, or even if you do have a small team but you're leading the project, if you go at it alone, then essentially you are fully accountable. So the sort of buck stops with you, as it were. But ultimately, this is a business tool. It's a business tool to be used across the whole of the organisation. So you absolutely need to involve peers, stakeholders at the early stages because it impacts them. We do often find that sometimes there is some reluctance from certain management bases not to get involved deliberately, just in case things go wrong. But again, it is a business tool. So absolutely don't go at it alone and invite stakeholders and peers to participate in the process. Okay, and then in terms of sort of set out your goals, there's some examples there. And again, this is going to be unique to you and your organisation and your challenges, but having a clear understanding, both from a functional and non-functional perspective. So what we mean by that is, yes, you're going to need functionality to bridge gaps in the process, but also what are your goals as a charity? What's your vision? What's your sort of thoughts around the employee experience? So having a clear understanding of what that looks like, because when you look to engage with vendors, which we'll summarise in a few moments, it is about creating a partnership ultimately, and having a good understanding of what it is that you need functionally and non-functionally. It will put you in a really great place to select the right provider. Next slide, please, Catherine. So understanding the selection process, this is pretty straightforward really, but there's a lot of work to do at the beginning, which is around the research stage. There's different ways that you can get exposure to, you know, what solutions are out there and which ones you should potentially be considering. Google is always a bit of a dangerous one because there are hundreds of solutions that in some way offer some level of HR sort of people management solution. But ultimately, Google search will enable you to look at the different providers out there against your functional requirements, you know, match the website in terms of functionality that's listed, modules that are offered, to get a good understanding. Actually, these are the potential providers that we want to be in front of. We do see the market sort of split into 3 different types of systems. So you have plug and play, which are more sort of off-the-shelf type products that are really great for organisations that maybe don't have a HR system, but that are small in size, don't have, you know, many complexities. You then have your sort of mid-market players that can offer more configurable, scalable solutions that cater for those more complexities and also manage more elements of the employee life cycle. And then you have your enterprise type systems that are really sort of suitable for you, sort of thousands of employees. Another sort of great way to get exposure to those systems will be the events that you attend. So I'm pretty sure everyone on this call at some point has attended a CRPD event, as an example, where you also walk past supplier stands. I'd absolutely encourage you just to note down so the names of the suppliers that are there, but also whether you're procuring, not procuring, thinking about it or not, actually just get some exposure to those systems by having a sort of demonstration on a stand, even if it's 5-10 minutes, because again, it just gives you sort of tools in the armory to revisit at the point of actually wanting to procure a system, because you've had some exposure to some of the you know, the main players within your space. So I'd absolutely encourage you to maximize those opportunities where you can. And then the last one is naturally, which I'm sure will probably be the first point of call, is to reach out to your network. But just do that with an open mind, because again, every organisation is very different to the next around experiences, challenges that you have, and therefore the solutions that you require. But it's a great way to understand, you know, what systems are you using, if it's you know, a fellow charity as an example, a colleague, a friend. So then you can consider them as part of your sort of procurement exercise. And then when we sort of move on to engaging with vendors, again, it's a really sort of simple process, but ultimately it's about ensuring that you have the reassurance and comfort to select the right provider. So there is a bit of a process to get there. Now, the first thing that I would encourage is once you've got sort of potentially 5 to 10 suppliers to consider that you think could be a good fit, is to reach out to them and to schedule an initial presentation, but to use that as a bit of a discovery. By this point, again, you've done that sort of exercise to understand exactly what you need. You've done that roadmap against your employee journey and looked at all the touch points. So it would be really useful at that point to provide a bit of a summary around, look, these are the challenges that we have. This is our vision. These are the things that we'd really like to talk about and understand your experience of, just so that the person that's going to be supporting that call can do some preparation on the day. And that will just give you that initial discovery, which by the end of these sort of things, you can get to a point where you sort of understand, actually, this provider could be a good fit, and we want to sort of take them further to a short list and further, exploration of their solutions. So that initial discovery is really important. The shortlist then tends to be, you've got a feeling of around sort of 2-3 suppliers that actually, from what you've seen and what you've talked about, are a really good fit. So then from that point, it's just about further discovery. Now, whilst we absolutely would say, look, engage with your stakeholders, get them involved at that early discovery stage. Sometimes that isn't possible, and look, we absolutely respect that. But absolutely from that further discovery, get them involved. And we quite often will do sort of deep dive presentations with large audiences where we cover off agendas. But what also works quite well is to spend time with specific individuals to make sure that we tick off what they need from a system. And if we get the opportunity to support you by talking with your stakeholders, then that just makes life easier at the end of that, the procurement process, because there's a clear return of investment for everyone involved. So further discovery, again, is really made up of interactions, demonstrations, really just to make sure that you've got that reassurance and comfort around actually they are the right provider for us. And I'd say set clear expectations during that process as well. Look, we absolutely appreciate it can be quite daunting going through the process and dealing with lots of salespeople, and setting clear expectations will just help you manage that. And by having a project plan with timelines, with goals that you're working towards, as well as a clear understanding of what you actually need from the process, will just help you manage the vendors that you're engaging with. Okay, so then you're on to the sort of exciting stage, which is selecting your preferred supplier. So you found the right fit for you, and then we're down to the sort of final elements of the procurement process. So hopefully by this point you've understood what your procurement process looks like, exactly what steps are involved. But the typical things that we would expect to sort of come out of the woodwork at that point would be general due diligence. Now, usually, when you're going through that shortlisted stage, you get opportunities presented to you to maybe tick some of those boxes and to quicken and speed up that process of actually moving forward to signing off on your preferred supplier. But due diligence tends to involve finance, IT. So, for example, making sure that IT are comfortable around third-party system integration, system security, and architecture. It could be finance from a commercial perspective, and legal to review agreements. That can take some time. So the earlier you can try and tick off some of those boxes during that shortlisted process will make life easier at the end. I've got negotiations in there, and I think it's important to sort of reference that, but I do want to just circle back to the point around budget. So where you are able to be transparent around budget, then you've got that sort of guarantee that you're going to be considering suppliers that from a commercial perspective are going to align with what spend that you have. And look, we absolutely recognise as non-for-profit charities, you don't have endless pockets. So that's a really important point, because there have been circumstances where we've supported procurement processes of systems for 6 months, 12 months, sometimes longer than that, to get to the point of preferred supplier where everyone's really excited to kickstart the project, but all of a sudden the budget unfortunately isn't there to warrant the investment within that particular system. So negotiations, absolutely, I'd encourage that, not just from a commercial perspective, but also around the return of investment and what you can get from a functional perspective. But if you can, again, be transparent around budgets, then you're in a good place by the time you get to preferred supplier. So these things will just be tweaks to what's been agreed to date. And then ultimately you make the commitment and move on to implementation, and that's when the fun begins. Next slide, please, Catherine. So just a couple of references to some mistakes that tend to get made, and just summarise some of the things that we spoke about around the do's and don'ts. So absolutely, the first thing I'd encourage is roadmap your employee journey. Look, it takes some time, but really breaking down every touch point again from an end user perspective, from a system perspective, from colleagues, stakeholders, from a data endpoint perspective, having that roadmap will give you a clear picture of what the challenges are within the organisation. Thoroughly research the market, so give yourself the opportunity to make sure that you're in front of the right providers. So leverage, again, all those sort of things that we spoke about, your network, search engines, events, where you can actually get some exposure to systems ready for when you're looking to procure the next one. Understand your procurement process. Again, that's probably my second important thing to get right. Engage stakeholders from the start. That gets much easier if you do complete that roadmap of the employee journey, and then know what the budget is. So those are probably the top do's I would say to consider when starting the process. The don'ts will be, don't forget to build a business case. Document everything that you go. So a big tip that I would give you would be, don't wait until you've found the preferred supplier to then think about building a business case. The business case should really start when you start that roadmap exercise, because you can have a working document that you can continually update to start to log all of those challenges that you've identified, all of those touch points within the journey that you want to address, and then again start to tick those things off as you get exposure to vendors and progress through the process. So have a working document, and that just makes life so much easier at the end of the process, because it's just about refining that business case based on everything that's happened to date. Don't promise and expect too much. So where you are maybe inviting internal stakeholders to participate and getting their engagement through promises around sort of challenges that they have that you're looking to fix, don't overpromise. And that's why it's really important to get them exposed and engaged, so they can see for themselves the solutions that are out there, the potential compromises I need to make, but also don't expect too much. And I know that might sound a bit strange, but ultimately the reality is you're not going to find a system that's going to do everything you need it to do in exactly the same way. So it's about finding the best fit, and it's about finding a partnership ultimately when sort of entering into these things. Don't forget about the end user. So yes, it's great from a functional perspective to consider what it is that you actually need, but really think about that end user experience and what technology can do to support and enhance that, so you can become that employer of choice. Don't forge ahead without a project plan. So have a clear direction of project, have a timeline, have something that you're working towards to maintain momentum and understand exactly what's next each step of the way. And then lastly there, don't make assumptions. So ask questions, make sure you're comfortable around how systems work, even all the way through to the end of the procurement process. Make sure that expectations align in terms of what's in scope, what's out scope. So again, don't make assumptions across the whole process, and make sure that, again, you're comfortable around the choice that you've made. Next slide, please, Catherine. So benefits of HR software, if you want to just flick over to the next one, Catherine. So again, I'm not going to touch on all of these points. I'm just going to pick out one or two that I think is worth sort of talking about. The reality is that the business case, and the next slide in a few moments that we'll look at around what to expect in return, is going to be tailored around you, your organisation, your challenges. So these are just some common examples we'd expect to form part of a business case. So calculating the return of investment of your chosen HR software is crucial for your organisation to understand the value that it's going to bring, but also therefore to justify the investment that you're asking for. So naturally, you need to make sure that you build a credible and compelling business case. Now, again, as I mentioned before, to make that easier, I'd encourage you to document everything as you go, because if you do leave it to the last minute, it's very difficult to sort of think back about all the demonstrations you've had, all the conversations you've had from memory to understand the solutions for the challenges that you've got. So document everything as you go. In terms of the return of investment, so there's 2 points that I'd sort of highlight on here. The first is around measuring the return of investment, and that can be measured, in a number of different ways: cost savings, increased efficiency, improved decision making, that essentially your chosen HR is going to enable you to support. But a really simple exercise that you can do when looking at creating that business case, and therefore warranting sort of a time saving and a cost saving, is to look at your data processes look at the things that you're doing manually, or the processes that maybe aren't as efficient as they could be. And I'll give you a very quick example, which you can then apply the same principle to all the sort of areas where you've got those data duplicating tasks, those manual administrative tasks that you're managing, maybe outside of a system or partly through a system. So to give you an example, let's say that you have to create a contract of employment for somebody that's a new starter. So a new starter needs a new contract. At the moment, you're managing that manually, and that takes you, say, 20 minutes to create. If you implement a system with automation, that might do that for you. Certainly Ciphr's does. So it could be a situation where you're taking 20 minutes to create it manually. The system's actually going to do that for you in 2 minutes. So therefore, there's a saving of 18 minutes. It's all pretty basic stuff. But then when you look at that 18-minute saving, let's say, for example, that you've got 10 new starters a month. That's 3 hours a month that you're going to save. Let's look at that across the year. That's 36 hours. When you then compare that time to the average salary, you've got a time saving that's actually got a monetary value attached to it. So when you start to think about all those efficiencies across that entire employee journey, each touch point, that can be a significant amount of time and money that you're going to save as a result of implementing a new system. So that's one great way to sort of understand ROI from a time and cost perspective. The other thing that I would sort of talk about here is, what is the risk of doing nothing? Now, this isn't a question that we tend to find often gets included within the business case, but think about the challenges that you have. Maybe your organization has poor traction. Maybe retention and development of talent is a struggle. Maybe there's indirect costs due to incorrect data and overpaying or underpaying people. So have a think about all the challenges that you face, and ultimately, if you do nothing, what does that mean for the organization? What's the impact, short term, long term? What's the risk? So really consider, if we don't do anything, where are we going to sort of end up, moving forward? So that is a really sort of powerful argument when considering to actually implement a solution and warrant the investment, as well as all the other sort of functional benefits and the example that I just gave. Next slide, please, Catherine. So the one point really that I want to highlight, just sort of conscious of time. So the one point that I want to highlight now on what to expect in return, and again, this would be tailored more towards you around the solutions to the challenges that you have, but supporting brand identities is incredibly important. So the reality is that, again, in our experience, lots of charities are attracting employees that, as Jackie mentioned earlier on, that are loyal to your identity, your cause, your brand. They could even potentially be donators to the charity. So it's really about ensuring that in return, a key benefit that you'll be able to implement as a result of procuring a new system is an enhanced employer experience. And that's why it's so important to understand and evaluate each touch point across that employee journey. If we consider those sort of employees that you have working for you that work for non-for-profit, they work for charity organisations, if they leave, typically they will leave to go through to another non-for-profit organisation, another charity. So again, brand culture, it's so important to consider that end user perspective when considering which partner to bring forward to implement, so that you can become an employer of choice. And there's things that Jackie touched on around employee benefits. There's other things that you can support around development through tools like learning management systems. There's better collaboration through platforms that you can put forward, better communication. There's lots of incentives within systems that are going to help you with those sort of key challenges. Next slide, please, Catherine. So just to sort of wrap things up, why Ciphr? Next slide, please, Kathleen. So ultimately, the way that sort of we approach a project is very much as a partnership. We are a big believer we are the right fit or we're not, but it's our job to really understand what's driving your project, to sort of get under the skin of what are the challenges that you face and how can we help you overcome them. From a functional perspective, that's really important. Functionally, we can deliver, a software functionality that's going to save time, money, enhance processes and the employee journey. But it's also looking at the non-functional things. It's looking at your vision now and for the long term, and making sure that, again, we can be that partner of choice as sort of the years go on, as this is a long-term investment ultimately. So creating a true partnership is really what we sort of strive to achieve. Next slide, please, Catherine. Jackie mentioned some of this stuff in terms of our experience. So Ciphr's been around for about 40 years now, specialising in people management solutions. I guess the only additional thing I'd say to what Jackie mentioned at the start is being able to offer a platform that's a central source of truth. It's managing that employee journey through one supplier, through integrated solutions. That would be sort of a key incentive. And it might not be that you need everything to start off with. We often find that charities and non-for-profit organisations will be looking for something like central HR to start with. But if the vision is to do more around progression development and therefore needing tools like learning management, learning content and so on, it could be a future state, then it's ensuring that we can offer that moving forward if it's required. The next stage, please, Catherine. Just a slide there to reference some of the organisations that trust us and to support them, and just echo sort of what we've said a couple of times through today's session. Naturally, a lot of this stuff that we've covered is sort of generalising our experiences, but we would absolutely value conversations with anyone that's joined, anyone that's watched this back, and to talk about your individual circumstances, your individual challenges, to have sort of specific conversations around what to consider and how to overcome the challenges through your procurement process. So please do reach out to us moving forward. Brilliant. So in terms of a recap then, so hopefully we've been able to share some insights today to get you thinking about maybe some of the challenges, resonate some of the challenges around what's happening within your organisation and how potentially to overcome that through functionality. Some of the key things, certainly from our experiences, that our charities and non-for-profit organisations tend to seek when looking to implement a new solution. Some of the key sort of things really would be a single source of truth. So having HR as the heart of your organisation, you're dealing with people from the first touch point to the last. So having that single source of truth, that single point of data entry that then pushes information to the rest of the organisation. Implementing solutions that ultimately are going to free up your time, that are going to allow you to focus on more strategic goals, that are going to allow you to not have to increase the size of teams due to budget constraints. Compliance clearly is going to be a really big thing that you need to manage, across the employee journey around onboarding checks, background checks, all the way through to ongoing checks during their lifetime with you. Integration, I know from the poll that's obviously really important. So integration is key to ensure again that you've got data integrity, validity. You've got a scenario where again your HR system is that single source of truth, where you've got the confidence then that is then talking to your other solutions, and where appropriate bringing information back. So you've got that integrity with that single source of truth being your HR system. And then lastly, implementing a solution that meets your budget, but also your functional requirements as well. So not having to compromise on what you need, but also making sure that it works for you from a commercial perspective based on the financial constraints that we know that you're facing. So I think we've got a little bit of time left to sort of open up to questions. I've not looked at the chat, but Catherine, have we had any that's popped up? And please, if there's anyone out there that wants to put something in the chat and ask us something, please feel free to do that.
Sure. Yeah. So we've had one question come in so far. So is there a limit on the number of employee records that we can hold?
Yeah, I'll pick that one up. So Ciphr's very scalable, as is modular. So as James indicated, you can start with the HR, you can add further modules later down the line, the same with scalability. So Ciphr's smallest customer, I think, is at 40 employees. And I think our largest customer has grown over many years of remaining with us. And I think they're in excess of 30,000 employees now. So there is no, to answer the question directly, there is no limit as to how many employees and volunteers you can put on the system.
Sure. I think that all though comes back to budget. What is your budget per employee? Because often it is costed in that way. Is that right, James?
Yeah, so you'll find generally across sort of our space, so certainly the mid-market space, that most vendors will sort of have a similar commercial model, where it is based on what's in the scope of the project, but also the number of records that you require. So one thing to definitely do from the offset is to understand what the commercial model looks like. And again, we're certainly happy to provide pricing commercials once we get an understanding of what it is that you need to give you a good idea about what that commercial looks like. But most vendors operate in the same way.
Sure. And one thing that we touched on was like ease of use and user experience. It should a mobile friendly access be something that charities particularly should be looking out for? I was just thinking about people who maybe aren't at a desk all the time when they're in working hours.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah, key, and that just goes back to really ensuring that when you're going through that roadmap exercise, that you drill down into the user experience, because quite often that sometimes gets sort of left behind. So making sure that absolutely it's accessible via phone, and all the common things are accessible via phone. You know, booking holiday, accessing pay slips, team information, managers being able to approve leave requests, the things essentially that you're going to want to do on a phone when you're at home. You know, planning a holiday as an example, or wanting to look at your pay slip out and about. So absolutely considering the makeup of your workforce, geographics, and again, making sure it's accessible at any time, anywhere is really important.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we're going to leave it there. We've taken nearly the full hour. We've gone really in depth today. Thank you, Jackie and James, for sharing all of that information with us. If you want more information from Ciphr, you can find us online, or you can email us at info@ciphr.com. I'm just going to share another poll into the webinar, and that will offer you the chance to give us some feedback about today's broadcast and let us know if you want us to follow up with you with any more information. So we really appreciate you filling that in if you can. Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone, for joining us live today. We really appreciate it. This has been recorded, and the recording will be sent to you by email shortly afterwards. So watch out for that. You can rewatch it at any time or share it with a colleague. Thanks again. That's all we've got time for. See you at another Ciphr webinar again soon. Bye.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.